Conference Finals getting going. What did I hear somebody call them? The Conference Championship round the other day? And I was like, what? Who calls them that? Anyway, the important thing is the third round of the Stanley Cup playoffs are underway. And my name is Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. We're live on Facebook Live, and of course, we are also live on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. The producer of the show is named Laura Saba. Laura is here with me in the Hockey Primetime studio in beautiful, sunny southwest borough of Montreal. Laura, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Connor. How are you?
I'm okay. Or is it good evening?
It's weird now. We're back at our home
o'clock.
time slot. It feels very different, but I think you can still call it the afternoon based on what it feels like when you're outside. It feels like a nice afternoon still. Okay,
it's according to Wikipedia, evening is the time of day between daytime and night, or between sunset and bedtime. There's no precise definition in terms of clock time, but it is considered to start around 6 p.m.
So it's still afternoon.
Afternoon. Good late afternoon to you, and welcome to Hockey Primetime, a new edition of the show ahead of Game 1 of the Western Conference Final, live from Winnipeg. The whiteout in full effect about 2 hours from now, and I'm sure that the Jets fans in around the rink out there, the Bell MTS Center in Winnipeg, are pre-gaming it in a big way, getting ready for this one. And it's the first ever, not just the first ever in this incarnation of the Winnipeg Jets, but the first ever conference final appearance for this franchise in any incarnation. Although I can't speak to the WHA days necessarily, but anyway, as long as there's been an NHL team in the city of Winnipeg, they've never been to the conference final, so this is amazing. I can't wait to see what this is going to be like, and we will literally turn it over live to coverage. As soon as we're done here at 7 o'clock Eastern, we will turn it over to coverage from the rink of game number 1, the Vegas Golden Knights and the Winnipeg Jets. But let's talk a little bit about what happened last night. And night 1 of the conference final, Laura, a successful night for me in one very important facet. Nobody licked anybody. Maybe it's the Brad Marchand effect. He's out of the playoffs. And so far, hey, look, it's only been, what have we had? 2 games with no Brad? Or, yeah, 2 games since Brad Marchand was eliminated. Nobody's licked anybody, at least not that any replays that I saw caught. So we've been lick-free, which is very nice. And that was a crazy swing that we saw at the end of the first period yesterday. You heard the highlight there, and Dave Mishkin not happy about it on the Tampa Bay Lightning Radio Network broadcast, but nobody was debating this, I don't think. Saw some Lightning fans talking about it when it happened, like, the referees, what are you doing? And of course, that's going to be your first reaction.
There were 6 players on the ice.
Man, there weren't just 6 players. There were 6 players on the ice for like a full 10 seconds. Like the whole time that when the puck was in their own end, they're circling around, things are happening. 6 guys on the ice. The breakaway pass happens. I will say that first of all, and I don't think any reasonable person, after seeing the dots on the replay, was actually saying that there was anything other than too many men on the ice there. But was that the nicest disallowed goal that you've ever seen?
Yes.
I don't know if I've ever seen a better disallowed goal than that.
That you wish was an actual goal.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I care about that necessarily. It would have been cool, but we all got to see the highlight. But Kucherov, the power move, the fact that he stayed on his feet there and scored there was crazy. And usually disallowed goals, and there's a scramble, some guy chops some other guy, somebody's in the crease, somebody nudged the goalie, maybe somebody was offside, but rarely will it be a guy making a move like that in that situation. I thought that disallowed goal was amazing. And Kucherov, if he can do a little bit more of that, then, well, hopefully in situations where it counts, they're gonna be okay, Tampa, I think. But that's massive. The numbers are very, very, and we'll see if it means anything anymore, because home ice doesn't seem to mean anything anymore. Nope. As a matter of fact, home ice is a disadvantage in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year. The home team has lost more than the road team, which is crazy. That is, and we'll see if we can get some of our more intelligent guests, people that are smarter than me. I don't know if you have an explanation for it.
No, I actually, I heard, I think it was Paul Maurice that was saying it, or Laviolette. One of them was saying it, that the time, because it's an 8:30 start, which for them is, they're not used to it, so the road team had a better chance adjusting. But I didn't follow that logic.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure it was Paul Maurice that said it. And he said it was because the road team is used to adapting, so they had to adapt to a different time anyway. It's like in I guess in the psychological, in the mentality of the game preparation.
Yeah.
But I'm not entirely. I don't follow. I think it's just it's one of those things where this time around it's a little bit it's a quirk of the playoffs. I think the road teams are playing really well, and how many times do we say in the regular season or in previous playoffs that you have to be good on the road to win? So I think we've got the second round and the third round. They've got a lot of good teams who are just playing to win, and they're putting together good road games.
Yes,
is the way I would put it.
Sure, but it's still I don't know. There's something strange about it. That anyway. I'd be curious to hear the input of various people. I think that's certainly one thing. But is it just all of a sudden in 2018 people have figured out how to win on the road? It seems after a long time there's been a lot of hockey, and I know the coaching is better than ever before. I do wonder sometimes about home ice and the fact that it can, and I've seen this happen here in Montreal. If we can go back just briefly to what we saw, it wasn't that long ago, just 2 nights ago, that we were watching Game 7 between the Jets and the Preds in that really sort of weird series, right? It was the series we were most looking forward to, I think most of us anyway, neutral fans, and I think fans of both those teams were, although you were probably a little bit sad. If you're a Jets fan, you were kind of sad that you had to face Nashville in the second round, although everything worked out. And if you're a Nashville fan, you didn't want to face the Jets in the second round. You'd hope somebody else could take care of them. But, well, now we know what happened. But there's a couple of things in the series, and I'm sure you've heard some of the stats. No team won 2 games in a row in that entire series. So they just alternated wins in every single game. Winnipeg game 1, Nashville game 2, Winnipeg game 3, so on and so forth. And then when it was finally over, it was, the other thing was the margin of victory. The average margin of victory in that series was about 3 goals per game, which is also, we thought this was going to be a really competitive series, and it was in a lot of ways, and that it went 7 games, but we had blowout scores, especially by Stanley Cup playoffs standards in that series as well.
And the standards of the 2 goaltenders, if you compare it to the regular season. I mean, they both had amazing regular seasons, and you wouldn't expect them to let in 3 goals every game.
Well, and Pekka Rinne to get yanked 3 times in one series, that tells you something. 4 times in the playoffs, and I know his teammates, PK Subban in particular, really went to bat for the guy, and why wouldn't they? He's their guy, and that's what good teammates do. But I think it's difficult not to, at the very least, look at Pekka Rinne and the way he played in that series and say, maybe you got a problem there. Now, granted, Nashville scored 1 goal in game number 7, and that's going to be hard to win any game with. But really, Rinne put them in a tough spot with those 2 goals early on. But with the home ice, one thing that I wonder about, and I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear what players have to say about this, but I've seen this in Montreal, is that this crazy energy in Montreal at its best, and it hasn't been like this now for a couple of years, but for the longest time in the playoffs in Montreal, it was just the atmosphere was so intense and so powerful that you couldn't help but feel it. It was really just sort of like it was an experience to be in the building, and you'd hear players talk about it from both sides. But what can happen in that situation, and I wonder if it did happen in maybe even in both games. So you think about Game 6 and Game 7. Game 6 in Winnipeg, there's that early goal, Arvidsson with the deflection as he's going down, crazy deflection that was called the high stick early on, but ended up counting. And right when the visiting team gets that early goal, all of that crazy positive excitement and energy can turn into, ooh, the air gets taken out of the building, and all of a sudden there's this sort of overwhelming nervous energy that can really, I think, sort of, and I've heard guys talk about it here in Montreal, you feel it on the ice. And if the building is quiet, it's almost like this ghostly atmosphere where you can hear everything, right? And we saw that happen in both buildings, 2 of the loudest buildings in the NHL. We saw that happen numerous times in this series. There was I think it was the Philip Forsberg goal. That might have been a 2-0 goal in Game 6 where you could hear Forsberg. He's down on the ice. Yeah, it was when he made that move at the blue line to somehow stay onside after getting a stick from the bench. And he goes to the net, he scores a beauty goal. And it's in Winnipeg. And
you can hear him cheering.
He's lying on his back next to the goal, and you can just hear him going, woo, woo! And the building is quiet. And that can, I think, be something that maybe hurts these teams a little bit. Although, further to what I responded to what you said, it's not like this is a brand new thing. I just feel like I've noticed it a lot this year. But maybe it just does. It speaks to the level of competition, maybe being closer than it ever has been before. That home ice is no longer the sort of dividing line between winning and losing that it once was. Or maybe it'll turn around in the conference finals, but so far not so much, as we saw what happened last night. The Washington Capitals just keep getting the job done. They're doing it without Nicholas Backstrom, and they keep winning these must-win games. And in the case of the last one that they won, wasn't a must-win game, but definitely a nice situation that they've now put themselves in. The only other thing I'll say here, and this is me putting on my I'm just going to put on my coaching jacket here on Hockey Primetime for a second. After the too many men on the ice penalty, that this obviously this was the swing of the hockey game yesterday. Right. You've got, what was it, 9 seconds, 7 seconds? Was it 7 seconds on the clock? And there's a face-off in the defensive zone. And so after you take the too many men on the ice, which happens to everybody takes the too many men on the ice penalty every once in a while. It's unfortunate, but it happens. But what is Tampa doing on that ensuing draw? You have 7 seconds left in the period. All you have to do is either, have your center drop down and just tie a guy up or whatever. But the one thing you can't do is let Alexander Ovechkin get a shot off from the slot. That's their only scoring play in that situation.
Was that the one TJ Oshie won the face-off and everybody was surprised by it? There was like some.
I guess so. Yeah, it was like a clean win. It was in the back of the net. In 2
it was
seconds.
So good. It was so good.
But that's the. You know what Washington's trying to do here. They are going to try to get the puck to Ovechkin for one-timer before the period is over. Everybody in the building knew that. My mom knew that. She wasn't even watching the game. And the fact that they let that happen and in that situation was such a swing in the hockey game. I know that that Tampa made things at least a little bit interesting later on, but I'd argue that if you look back on it, maybe that the game was lost in that moment. So that's it. Just don't give Alexander Ovechkin that look. How many times has he done that? Like, I don't even think I'm exaggerating when I say that probably in his career, he has done that 350 times, maybe 400 times. He has scored a goal like that on the power play, because I know he's got about 750 or so career goals now. If you look at the regular season and playoffs, half of them have been one-timers on the power play. It's not unreasonable to think that, is it? So don't forget, the Western Conference Final begins today at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the Central Time Zone. That would be 6 p.m. And so if you're listening in Nashville or, in Winnipeg, probably more precisely. Sorry, I had my time zone pages. I was wondering what Paul Maurice said about the time and the time zones.
Yeah. So
Nashville and Winnipeg are in the same time zone.
They are in the same time zone. It was just late for them was his argument. Is they're used to 7 o'clock starts or 7:30, and then they were starting at 8:30. That was his. I don't follow it, but he did say it.
Cool. Anyway, Nashville is out, and we are going to dissect their rotting corpse with our next guest. His name is J.R. Lind. He writes for Patch.com, spent years covering the Nashville Predators, and he's been keeping an eye on them throughout the course of the season and the playoffs. We will perform the autopsy on the Nashville Predators, and let's hope it doesn't get too ugly. That's what's coming up next year. This is Hockey Prime Time on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live on Facebook Live and at hockeyprimetime.com. Nashville Predators season. That 2-0 goal, and you give up two quick ones like that, especially soft ones, hard to come back from it. But to hear PK Subban and other Predators say it, no, that wasn't it. Don't blame Pekka Rinne. Stop blaming Pekka Rinne. Why are you guys still talking about Pekka Rinne? Quit talking about Pekka Rinne. I do not want to hear you talk about Pekka Rinne anymore. I'm paraphrasing it, but that's essentially what we heard from a lot of Nashville Predators after that game. And then we heard media members like, I think it was Kyprios from Sportsnet saying that he thinks that's it for Pekka Rinne with the Nashville Predators, and they're going to try to move on from him in this offseason. Might be easier said than done, but you're talking about the reigning Vezina Trophy winner, right? The guy's going to win the Vezina Trophy. Like, I'd be shocked if he doesn't. It would be weird, wouldn't it, if that were to happen? The Vezina Trophy winning goaltender were to be traded. We've had thank you for your time. We've had enough, and this would happen 24 hours after the guy who's won Coach of the Year in the NBA gets fired too. How many sports does that happen in? You win Coach of the Year, then you get fired within about 48 hours. With more on the story of the Nashville Predators, who are out after getting eliminated in 7 games on Thursday night by the Winnipeg Jets at home, mind you. We've got from Patch.com, J.R. Lind back on the show. Hello, sir.
Hello.
So, blaming Pekka Rinne, what do you think? Fair or not fair?
No, I think it's certainly fair to say that the Pekka Rinne, not just during the 7 games against Winnipeg, but even the first round series against Colorado, was not the Pekka Rinne we saw in the playoffs last year that took the Predators to the Stanley Cup final, and it certainly wasn't the Pekka Rinne who's, like you said, likely to win the Vezina Trophy next month. He'll turn 37 in the early part of next season, being the last year of that 7-year deal, and he does have a no movement. Although, with a $7 million contract, 1-year deal for a 36-year-old goalie is virtually a no movement, on its own. But he would have to waive his no movement to get traded. Everything I know about David Boyle and what sort of Pekka Rinne means to this city and means to this team, I don't see it going down like that. If it becomes a 1 and 1A situation next year with UC Saros, or if Boyle makes a move this summer for another goalie, we might see that. But it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the idea that they're just going to ship him out, because of 13 bad games, although he wasn't terrible in all of those, obviously. But
would it be too hot of a take for me to suggest that he kind of, in a way, picked up where he left off in the Stanley Cup final last year, though?
Yeah. And his troubles against Pittsburgh are well documented, and it's not something that really was put in the spotlight until obviously they played 6 games against Pittsburgh last year, just because Nashville and the Penguins don't play very often. But he has not been successful against Pittsburgh historically, and it really carried over. It's almost like, is he going to be the guy we saw in the Stanley Cup final in the regular season? And he wasn't. He was the guy we saw in the first 3 rounds last year in the regular season, and then that Pekka Rinne came back in the playoffs rather than the one we've really grown accustomed to since October this year, where arguably, his best season, maybe his best season since probably that 2010 year, where he probably should have won the Vezina Trophy.
With J.R. Lind of Patch.com, I was just laughing because I saw a tweet from a friend of the show and somebody who covers the Nashville Predators, Jim Diamond, the news moments ago that Kyle Turris has been added to Canada's roster for the World Hockey Championships. And Jim's sarcastic quote tweet, "Hoping to continue his recent stretch of helping Canadian teams succeed," says Jim. What about Kyle Turris, JR, and the run that that is a pretty sick burn from Jim there. But Turris,
he's full of them.
Well, but they brought this guy in to do a number of things, and it looked pretty darn good at first. But it just seemed like he didn't bring anything in the playoffs, did he?
No, and that entire line, which when they traded for Turris in November, and they put him between Craig Smith and Kevin Fiala, and that line was plug and play pretty much from the beginning. In fact, I think Turris scored in his first game as a Predator, but they were just excellent all year. And really, when you can put a line like that together behind the Jofa line, behind Johansson, Forsberg, and Victor Arvidsson, who, you put those two lines together, and then Nashville bolsters the bottom six, and and that's really what led Nashville to win the President's Trophy. But Turris and Smith and Fiala were just completely ineffective through 13 games, and that's sort of the other thing that gets lost in the conversation of the Predators' failure in the playoffs is that everybody's going to talk about Rinne, but let's not forget that Kyle Turris had 3 assists in 13 games, and Roman Josi and Ryan Ellis didn't score at all, and largely the defense of Nashville, which has been what the Predators have been known for years, and rightfully so with that top 4 particularly, was mediocre for long stretches and very bad a lot of times. But again, the story is going to be Rinne gives up sort of a couple of softies in Game 7, and not that Nashville couldn't protect a 3-0 lead in Winnipeg in Game 3, and couldn't skull Connor Hellebuck in Game 1 despite really controlling that game. I understand why people are going to talk about Rinne, because he was just so much worse in the playoffs than he was in the regular season. But it certainly wasn't all his fault. And maybe that's what PK Subban was saying after the game, and when he more or less said we all could have been better. And he was absolutely right, although he was pretty good.
He was, and that's, you talked about the D and Ellis and Josi in particular, and then sort of their lack of production. I guess one of the tempting things to do, JR, is to just sort of look at, okay, this team made the Stanley Cup final and went 6 games with the champs last year. This roster sort of appears to be on paper a better and healthier roster, the one that got eliminated than the one that went all the way there a year ago. I guess that's it. I know it's sort of a very easy cut and paste way of looking at things, and it's, I can almost apply a similar logic to looking at the Washington Capitals, who are up 1-0 in the conference finals. Their roster doesn't seem to be anywhere good on paper as the one that got eliminated by the Penguins last year, but here they are beating them. I guess it's a difficult thing to sort of quantify, but a lot of the things that went right, namely Ryan Ellis being a beast for them on the blue line, Roman Josi and Ekholm all sort of being, there was a big top 4. They had one defenseman who was really bringing it. That was PK Subban, and everybody else just looked kind of okay and showed signs of life, but not enough, right?
Yeah, and that's really something that should be talked about a lot more. I think more so than Rinne's failures, but and even Subban, who I think set some kind of record for power play goals by a defenseman in a series or something. I don't really. I mean, he was great on the power play, but even at times he was really out of place in his own end, and really the only consistent group was the combination of pick 2 of Matt Irwin and Alexei Emelin and Yannick Weber when he came back and got healthy. And Yannick Weber, who had not played really since mid-March, looked really, really good in a couple of games against Winnipeg. Now, granted, that pairing, by virtue of who the top 4 are, is going to get a lot easier minutes, but that big 4 that we talk about in Nashville so much just did not help at all, and didn't cover up, any of the mistakes that Rinne was making that were maybe uncharacteristic, leaving some rebounds out, and they certainly weren't helping him in odd man situations. But I think that's the back end of the team is really something you point at, which is hard for people, I think, to, when you're talking about the Nashville Predators, a team that has been known for years for strong goaltending and strong defense, that's what sort of let them go against Winnipeg, and even really against Colorado, frankly.
Finishing up here with J.R. Lind, covering the Nashville Predators and discussing their playoff exit here. You can read his work at patch.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at J.R. Lind, L-I-N-D. And Mike Fisher, is he retired for real this time?
Yes, he said he has milked the cow, I think was, I may be paraphrasing, but not much. I think he said there is no milk left in the cow, something about a cow and milk. He has said he's retired. When you talk about, and this is something that I guess if you're someone who is a fan of the Predators that you are encouraged by, the team is pretty young outside of Fisher, who's retiring. And Rene, who we've talked about, turns 37 next year. Scott Hartnell is sort of the other graybeard on the team, and he said he'd love to come back, but he's also not ruling retirement out. But outside of that, I mean, Philip Forsberg, who, if you want to point to someone who looked really, really good in the playoffs, obviously had some highlight reel goals, is only 23, which, I'm a person who watches the team 82 times a year. And I look at it and I go, he's only 23? It feels like he's been here for a million years. But, the team is young, and outside of Brian Ellis, whose deal is up next July, not this coming one, everybody's pretty much locked up for a while. So, sure, it feels bad now, and it should. This is a team that, honestly, should have competed for and likely won the Stanley Cup, and they made that their goal early on. The team still won the President's Trophy and is still going to have 95% of the contributors back next year.
And they've got some nice prospects too. This kid Eli Tolvanen, the Finnish kid, right? He was tearing it up this year. There's Dante Fabro on the blue line, who looks like he might be the next great Preds defenseman. So there's guys coming up, but they've done a good job of drafting and keeping guys in the system. But I guess, and you mentioned the word Stanley Cup there, and that had to be what a lot of people would hope. If you come that close and you improve your roster in the offseason, the expectations to contend for the Stanley Cup. So by that metric, and I know you mentioned the President's Trophy and the individual success, it's the best regular season they've ever had. Is this a disappointing season from the Preds from where you're standing?
Yeah, I think so. And they made it fairly clear early on that it was sort of Stanley Cup or bust, and not in a way like this is the last chance. I don't think anybody's buying that. But the whole motto all year for the team was 61-35, which is the number of minutes short of winning they were last year. And I don't want to take away. I know hockey fans sort of poo-poo the President's Trophy. The President's Trophy is hard to win. You have to be the best team over 82 games, and certainly when you're Nashville and you're in the Central Division, and frankly the second best team in the league is, in terms of points and probably in terms of actual talent, is also in your division, and the Central is sort of historically good. Winning the President's Trophy is nothing to sneeze at, but they made it very, very clear early on that it was cup or bust. So flaming out in the second round is definitely a disappointment.
JR, thanks for your time, man, throughout the course of the season and during the playoffs. We appreciate it, and have fun this summer.
I will. Thanks a lot.
That is jrlinpatch.com and helping me dissect the corpse of the Nashville Predators. We are now closing up the Y incision, and we will move on. Now let's talk about the teams that are alive and well. And we'll start with one of the ones that's going tonight, the Vegas Golden Knights. Will start their third-round series. I don't know if you knew this, Laura. This is the first series, the first conference final series in Vegas Golden Knights history. So they're undefeated in the conference finals. They've never lost a playoff series, this franchise. A lot of people don't know that. We're going to talk about the Vegas Golden Knights. We'll tee up their game and their series against the Winnipeg Jets from a Vegas perspective with Jesse Granger from the Las Vegas Sun. That's coming up next. I wonder what that atmosphere is like in Winnipeg. We'll get a chance to find out a little bit later on in the show. We're with you until game time, so about 90 minutes to go. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio, also streaming live on hockeyprimetime.com. Winnipeg Jets tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Central. If you're watching on the West Coast, it'll be a 4 o'clock start. I hope you're having a good weekend so far. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. We are live in Hockey Primetime Studios here in Montreal. This is the hub, and we'll be welcoming in guests from all over the place, including from places as far away as, well, we've already been to Nashville. We will go to Winnipeg, and we're hoping to go there shortly to find out what things are going like for the Vegas Golden Knights. So the Vegas Golden Knights, how well are things going for them? Well, there's a write-up about them in the Guardian newspaper, one of the biggest newspapers in the world, and you can go to Guardian.com and read about it. The headline, How the Vegas Golden Knights Became the Most Remarkable Story in Sports. Now, the Guardian is a British newspaper, and, well, you know that if a hockey team, if an NHL team makes it into a British newspaper, it's got to be a pretty cool story, and for my money, this is the best sports story. This is the best sports story, not just this year, but really one of the best ones I can remember. And we did talk about this last week, and the fact that it could probably make a pretty cool movie if they were to put it together. And we'll sort of call back to that in just a little bit and get some of your suggestions. If you have suggestions for the casting of the movie, the story, what is it going to be called? Like Winning the Vegas Golden Knights story or something like that.
There's got to be golden in the title, I think.
Golden showers. No, that doesn't work. No, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the answer is. But in the Guardian newspaper, they're talking about it, and a passage from the article. The NHL wasn't supposed to work in Las Vegas. The city was part of the nebulous group of, quote, non-traditional hockey markets, end quote, and their roster was cobbled together. But it's worked, and it's now become impossible for both locals and those around the hockey world not to be swept up in the kind of sports story that is on par with the implausible championship that Leicester City won. If you're not a soccer fan, you may not know, but Leicester City is a sort of an unheralded team in the Premier League, the top soccer league in England, that managed to win the Barclays Premier League back in 2016. So that's the sort of the obvious parallel that you'll draw. It's a little bit different, though, because Leicester City, they play in a league that is one of the most competitive leagues, and it is incredible, don't get me wrong, that they won it. But I guess the thing is, too, is that there's no playoffs in soccer. So it was one thing that Vegas won their division, which in and of itself is sort of the equivalent of winning the Premier League. But this is like winning a double in soccer. In soccer, you compete in other competitions in addition to your domestic league. There's 2 domestic cups in most big leagues, and then there's the Champions League, and you've probably heard of the Champions League. What the Champions League is the best soccer teams from all over, all the different leagues in Europe face each other in a tournament that sort of lasts all season long. And the final actually is going to be taking place in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks from today, if I'm not mistaken. And what Vegas is doing now in the conference final is like they're looking like maybe they'll win not just the league, but also the Champions League, and that I think makes it that much more impressive, because it's one thing to win a bunch of games and pull a bunch of things off. It's another to win best of 7 playoff series against some of the best teams. And the San Jose Sharks prove that well, they're maybe a little bit better than the LA Kings. And sure, the Kings didn't look that good, but you can only face the opponents that you get. And the reason that they drew the LA Kings was because they had such a good regular season. So now here they are. They're going into a Winnipeg to look to spoil yet another party. The Winnipeg Jets are getting ready to host game number 1 of the Western Conference Final. So anyway, I guess I just wanted to point out that if you've made it into the Guardian newspaper, then
you're a big deal.
Well, you're getting a little bit of the credit that you deserve. The thing that they've been doing, though, really,
Jesse's on the line.
They've been doing it since day 1 of the season. And they've been doing it since day 1 of the playoffs. Is I think that on some level, maybe it's a subconscious thing, but I don't think teams are necessarily ready for them. And we saw what happened. What was it? A 7-0 win in game 1 of the second round there against San Jose. So we'll see if they can ruin the party out there in Winnipeg. And it is time for us to go to Winnipeg right now. Our next guest covering the Vegas Golden Knights, and has been doing so all year long. The Vegas Golden Knights, who have never lost a playoff series and are undefeated in the conference finals so far in their existence. Jesse Granger with the Las Vegas Sun. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for making time for us here today. I appreciate it. And are you out there in Winnipeg?
I am. I am overlooking the street next to the Bell MTS place where they do the whiteout. It's starting to fill in already.
That's great. And so what can you tell me about what it's your experience been like there? How's it been so far?
Well, this is my first time to Canada, actually.
Okay.
And I've been very impressed. And I've been walking around downtown just kind of getting a feel of the city. And, man, it's hard to find a human being that's not wearing white.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, everybody is on board. And now in the conference final, it's really cool. Have you found or have you been able to locate any courageous traveling Vegas fans?
There have been a few, not as many as in California as expected, but there were actually a couple on my flight up here. And yeah, there's a few here and there. I'm going to have to search some out to talk to them, though.
Okay. So the series gets going. We're about an hour and maybe an hour and a half, to be exact, away from puck drop, and coverage here on Sirius XM NHL Radio begins at 7 o'clock Eastern sharp. Are the Jets that much better than the teams that they've faced so far, the Kings and the Sharks?
I do think they are. I've been saying basically down the stretch of the season and heading into the playoffs, the Pacific Division is awful aside from the Golden Knights. And I picked the Golden Knights to kind of cruise through those first two rounds, and not even really because I think Vegas is that good. I just think the Sharks, Kings, and Ducks aren't very good. I think this Jets team is significantly better, and this is going to be a really, really tough test for them.
And I guess the one of the questions is going to be, and it does really often come down to this when we're talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs, which goaltender is going to be better? And no goaltender has been better than Marc-Andre Fleury in these playoffs so far. But as you mentioned, he has not faced the kind of firepower that Winnipeg is able to bring on all four lines, really, but especially those top two or arguably top three lines. Do you think they have the troops and the game plan to deal with that amount of firepower?
Yeah, like you said, you can argue three. I think Winnipeg might have the best third line in the NHL, and that third line has been the bugaboo for the Golden Knights all season. Gerard Gallant has mixed and juggled and tried about everything he possibly can. They traded for Tomas Tatar at the trading deadline to try to get something going on that third line. That hasn't worked out. He's now a healthy scratch in the playoffs. If the Golden Knights' third line of Alex Tuch, Cody Eakin, and Oscar Lindbergh can at least compete with Winnipeg's, I think the Golden Knights win the series. I just don't know if they can.
Right, and that's why they play the games, right? So, and how did it go for the Vegas Golden Knights during the regular season against Winnipeg?
They did fairly well. I mean, they beat them pretty easily down in Vegas. I think it was 5-2. And then they split the series up here. They won by a couple goals in one game, and then I think they lost in overtime, I want to say. But they did fairly well against them, and two of those games were with Max Lagacé at goalie, not Fleury. The one game with Fleury, the Golden Knights did win. So, I mean, they've played well, but obviously this is a different beast.
It's interesting too when it comes to Fleury, and I wonder about this because of the fact that given the way that he played this season and the numbers that he put up, if he'd been healthy all year, he would likely be a Vezina finalist and perhaps even the front runner to win the Vezina trophy. But he ends up without a nomination. Again, just the games played aren't necessarily there. But how much of a boon or how much of a positive has it been sort of now in retrospect that he seems to be as fresh as he is at this time of the year?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you see a lot of guys like Bobrovsky, and you saw Talbot last year, and they get used 70 games, and they just don't have it any left when they get to the playoffs. And as unfortunate, and especially with concussions, I mean, you never wish that upon anybody, but it could have been a blessing in disguise for the Golden Knights. And like you said, I think if you extrapolate Fleury's stats to a full season of health, I mean, he'd be the runaway winner for the Vezina. He's first in basically every statistical category he can be in, and he's continued that in the playoffs. And I mean, so far, the Golden Knights have been the better team. They haven't needed Fleury to steal a series. He's probably been good enough to steal a series if they needed him to. This one might be the one where they actually need. They brought this guy over from Pittsburgh. This may be the moment that they brought him over for to try to steal this series for him.
And I guess they do have the clear edge in goal, right? I know that one guy is a Vezina finalist and one isn't, but given the way things have gone for Fleury, and given the way that Vegas has sort of the way that I'm not going to say has made life easy for him, because I don't know if that's really fair. I mean, he's been outstanding in his own right, and I don't want to take anything away from him, but they really have his defense, his forwards, and the guys in front of him have really sort of played to his strengths, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. And Hellebuck is really, really good. I think I watched a lot of Hellebuck before this series, as well as Rene, because I didn't know who they were going to play. And I noticed if he's got a weakness, it's his 5-hole. And guys like James Neal and David Perron have shown that they're really good at that, especially against Jonathan Quick. Obviously, we all saw how amazing he was in the first round. And when they were able to beat him, it was through the 5-hole. Eric Hall did it in overtime. James Neal did it in L.A. And I think if you see Hellebuck give up a few early ones, especially in those games down in Vegas in that crazy environment, it's going to be low in the net, not high.
And it was only 48 hours ago, in fact, not even, that we were wondering who was going to win Game 7 between Nashville and Winnipeg. We know that Winnipeg did win it, and so the series starts there. Did you have a sense before, or do you have a sense now? And I know that it's impossible to get guys to reveal the answer to this question, but from your perspective, which was a better matchup for them? Was it the Jets or the Predators?
Yeah, I mean, I asked everybody a million times, and they're not going to tell me anything. But in my opinion, the easier matchup was Nashville, just because the forward depth isn't there. Nashville's got some top-end guys in Forsberg and all them, but they just don't have the lines to run 4 lines and match up with the Golden Knights like the Jets do. Nashville does have better defense, but I think the Jets have pretty good defensemen too, and Myers is playing well now. I think the Jets are definitely the tougher matchup, and I don't trust Pekka Rinne as far as I can throw him. I
think that's fair. We've now, the last 3 playoff series he's been involved in, he's been sort of a Jekyll and Hyde goaltender, which is one of the things it's nice when you have wait, which one's bad? It's nice when you have Jekyll, but when Hyde shows up, then you find yourself losing Game 7 the way that they did, and getting yanked 4 times. That's amazing. Rinne was yanked 4 times in 2 rounds. Fleury had 4 shutouts in 2 rounds, and I know which stat I'd rather have for my goaltender. Finishing up with Jesse Granger from the Las Vegas Sun, the Vegas Golden Knights beginning their series just over an hour from now in Winnipeg against the Jets. I brought this up last week, and we were having some fun with it on Twitter this week, was the movie adaptation of the Vegas Golden Knights, Who Plays Who? And I thought I'd throw that at you, Jesse. Do you have any suggestions for me for who should play the key parts in the Vegas Golden Knights film adaptation?
I think I've got 2 that are very good. And the first one is Anthony Hopkins plays Gerard Gallant.
Yes,
he's a little old.
Yeah, he's kind of old, though, no?
Works the movie magic.
Yeah.
Works the movie magic. And I think if you make Hopkins look a little younger, he's spot on Gerard Gallant.
That's a great call. And
then the other one is it's too easy. Sacha Baron Cohen has to play Marc-Andre Fleury, right? If you've seen Talladega Nights, his French NASCAR driver, Jean Girard. I mean, he basically is Marc-Andre Fleury in that movie, isn't that?
Yeah, I mean, with some minor differences, I suppose. But yeah, I think Marc-Andre Fleury less likely to say really inappropriate things at really inappropriate times. But no, all right. So Sacha Baron Cohen.
The demeanor isn't there. Yeah, but the accent and the look he's got down.
All right, we have our first 2 suggestions: Anthony Hopkins as Gerard Gallant and Sacha Baron Cohen in the role of Marc-Andre Fleury. And do you have an idea for a movie title? We were wondering about that. I'm not sure. I was thinking, like I said, Winning, the Vegas Golden Knights story, but it might be too easy.
Yeah, Vegas Strong is the big one in Vegas that everybody has on their shirts and stuff. I honestly, that one I'm stumped.
I can't wait to see what it's going to be like there for Game 3 in a couple of days, especially if they can steal one here in Winnipeg. Jesse, thanks for your time. Have fun out there in Winnipeg, and we'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Cheers. So that is Jesse Granger from the Las Vegas Sun covering the Vegas Golden Knights, who are getting going just over an hour from now in Winnipeg. How's your weekend going so far? Not too shabby over here, the Hockey Primetime studio here in beautiful downtown Montreal, where the sun has been shining all day long, and we're expecting to hear it keep shining all week long. This is a very exciting time. Maybe spring/summer is actually finally here. Coming up in just a few moments, so we've got our next guest, and we've threw it out there on Twitter. The Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas Golden Knights, the movie. Nah, that's not good enough, eh? Anyway, something like that. Who's going to play which part? So we've got some ideas, we've got some suggestions, and we've got some responses for what we should call the movie. That's what's coming up next here. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. you're going to have to do this. I don't
I'll
see
read them.
anything that people
I'll read
write
them,
on
and
Twitter.
you can.
That'll be a game that we probably all could afford. So who plays the key parts in the Vegas Golden Knights film adaptation? It's got to happen, right?
Right.
I hope it's a feature film and not like a straight-to-TV CBC kind of movie. Like, I want the real deal.
I think it could be cool.
Well, as long as we're living in a fantasy world, we will just say yes, absolutely, it's going to happen, and it's going to have a budget of $150 million. It's going to be the best, the most realistic hockey playing movie we've ever seen. Although I think they have to win the Stanley Cup for it to actually happen, but we'll just assume that that's going to happen right now. So we threw it out there on the Twitter yesterday from the Hockey Primetime official Twitter account. Let's see here. Laura Saba threw the tweet out there. Let's see.
And I have some responses on my own Twitter as well.
So, inspired by Connor's question during last week's show, we'd like to hear from you. Tell us, if you were to make a movie about the Vegas Golden Knights' historical first season, which Hollywood stars would you cast as the main players? We've also got some suggestions, and we'll still take them for what the movie should be called. Our executive producer, Sam Wu, suggests Jackpot, the Vegas Golden Knights story. Not bad. Jesse Ralph, technical producer of the show back at Sirius XM NHL Network Studios. The House Always Wins. It's pretty good.
I like it.
Especially if they win.
Right. And especially because their home record was so good, right?
That's true. That's true. But they have to win the Stanley Cup. Like, you can't call it that if they end up losing. Right?
This is true.
Because then the house doesn't always win.
Then it's more like a Cinderella type story where you lose in the very end.
Which but
you learn a lot.
We've seen it. We've seen it happen before. It's true. So what responses do we get for casting?
Okay, so our friend Chris Martell suggested Tom Hanks for Gerard Gallant.
Whoa.
Longtime listener Ashley Ash on Ice suggested Justin Long as James Neal.
Justin Long, who's that?
You remember the Mac and the Apple commercial? Yeah. Like, I'm a Mac and I'm a PC, so like the Mac guy.
Oh yeah, here he is. Okay.
So he looks a little bit like James Neal, but I'm feeling Jamie Kennedy more.
Jamie Kennedy, come on now.
He looks like James Neal.
Listen, we need some A-list people
All right,
here. Justin Long and James Neal aren't pushing the needle from the movie-going audience in 2018. I'm playing the part of the Hollywood executive here. I need big names.
How's this? Chris Hemsworth is a bit on the older end, but he's got the hair and the build to make a decent William Carlson.
90.
Chris Hemsworth is not Thor, right? That's Liam Hemsworth?
It's the other one, yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
No, he is Thor. He is Thor. Chris Hemsworth is, unless, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that he is Thor. In which case, yes. Good,
okay,
good
that's
stuff.
A-list enough for you.
Yeah.
So Jesse Ralph, our producer yesterday, suggested John Hamm to be John McPhee.
George McPhee?
George McPhee.
Wow.
And then
wouldn't you be happy if you're George McPhee and that's the guy?
I know he's got the swagger, he's got the confidence, he's got that deep voice.
Yeah,
but then he topped it by saying Steve Carell.
Ooh,
because
I like that.
There's a little bit of an edge to it.
Steve Carell's a good call for George McPhee. And he plays hockey.
And he does. And I'm having a hard time casting Marc-Andre Fleury, but maybe our friend Jay Baruchel would be good.
Jay Baruchel is Marc-Andre Fleury.
And goofy quality.
Yeah, he's also lanky, which would work. Jesse Granger, of course, just suggested Sacha Baron Cohen in our last segment as the part of Marc-Andre Fleury. So anyway, your suggestions are always welcome, and it is a pleasure to hang out with you guys online and beyond, or even on Facebook Live. Coming up next, let's kick off the next half of the show. Murat Atesh covers the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic out there in Winnipeg. Let's get a Jets perspective on the Western Conference Final. That's what's coming up next here. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. The show is also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. beating UC Saros after Pecorino was chased from the goal. And now we know it's the Winnipeg Jets and the Vegas Golden Knights at 7 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock on the West Coast tonight. This might be the only 7 o'clock start we get in this whole series, so I hope you enjoy it. If you're like me and you work mornings during the week and you wake up at 4 a.m., you're very sad about these 8 o'clock Eastern time starts, but you'll take them. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a great series. This is a very, very good Jets team making their first ever conference finals appearance. How long did they have to wait for it? Vegas making their first ever conference finals appearance in their first ever season of existence. Murat Atesh, I should say, is covering the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic, and he is on the line with us right now, joining us for the first time ever. Thank you, and welcome. How you doing, man?
Hey, doing great, Connor. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet, and thanks for making time for us here. We really appreciate it. So let's start here. We've seen teams, and namely what happened to San Jose in Game 1 of their series, where Vegas just ran them over in the first period and never really stopped. So the Jets saw that, right? And they know that, be careful.
Yeah, I think that I don't think anybody's taking Vegas particularly lightly in amongst Winnipeg's Jets coaching staff, and from hearing them over the past few days. I think one of the striking things for me is that despite all of the talk about Winnipeg and Nashville being the class of the Western Conference and maybe a tier above the rest of the teams, including Vegas, the line of Karlsson, Marchessault, and Smith have actually been even more dominant than Scheifele's or Johansson's lines throughout the playoffs so far in terms of their on-ice possession metrics. At 5-on-5, Marchessault, Karlsson, and Smith are up 7 goals, have scored 7 times, have been scored on only twice. Part of that, obviously, is Fleury's a hot streak that he's on. But if anyone in Winnipeg right now is thinking that the top-end talent is about to drop off, they'd be sorely mistaken.
But I guess the other thing is, and I think this is the reason a lot of people are giving Winnipeg the edge here, is that when you start looking down the lines, line 2, line 3, hard not to give the Jets the edge, right?
Yeah, and I think that's how I look at the series as well. With Winnipeg, the thing that they are able to do is run all 4 lines that they have, which are as healthy as playoff rosters get, with Perreault back in the lineup partway through the last series, and with a 4th line of Lowry, Armia, and Kopp, which is a possession dynamite line that can that has experience and in a couple of different forms, taking on other teams' best players throughout the season, including your Giroux and your Kucherovs and all of the top-end talent. And that's the 4th line. So when you have guys like Scheifele at the top scoring 10 goals and leading the goal-scoring race, and then Stastny, and then Little, and then that line, yeah, I think it's very tough to match up against. On defense as well, for example, going against the top-end talent, Ryan Johansson's line had 25 points against Winnipeg last series. It was more than the entire rest of Nashville's team put together. Game 7, 15 out of 22 shifts against Morrissey and Trouba, and they were held off the score sheet at 5-on-5. So Winnipeg can do it and beat you any way you want, really, with that depth.
We're talking Winnipeg Jets hockey with Murat Atesh, who covers them for The Athletic, and looking at a couple of different things. And I know one of the ones that you wrote about at The Athletic was well, I don't know if it's a minor lineup change, but it's made a massive difference, was the Kyle Connor move, putting him into Ehlers' spot. Ehlers still hasn't gotten it going offensively so far in the playoffs, which we'll get to in a second. But how much of a difference did it make getting Connor out there with Scheifele and Wheeler in that spot?
Getting Kyle Connor onto that top line to start the year was a major coup for Winnipeg. And the ability of Winnipeg's coaching staff to then put veterans one step further down the lineup, it's part of what creates an extreme amount of depth for the Jets. There were a couple of mid-game wrinkles and mid-series wrinkles where you saw Connor and Ehlers switch spots throughout round 2. And within the context of those games, they seem to be turning points. And to really watch how that went down, the Winnipeg transition through the neutral zone changed as Wheeler and Scheifele suddenly had to respond to Nick Ehlers flying through the neutral zone. And then similarly, Kyle Connor's more of a straight line player. And what he was able to do for that second line genuinely transformed the nature of that game. They've gone back to Conor at the top, though, and I think that's the way that it's going to stay to kick into Vegas tonight.
So Connor, Scheifele, Wheeler, that means Ehlers, Stastny, and Laine. And Stastny, a guy who just joined the team a couple of months ago, in between a very young guy and 22-year-old Ehlers, though he's been around for a bit. Patrick Laine is still just 20. He just turned 20 not that long ago. And Ehlers and Laine haven't really been going. Let's start with Ehlers. Is he sort of doing the things, and you always hear about this from guys when they're not scoring goals, and if they feel their game is going well, they say, hey, listen, the goals are going to come, and the Jets are winning games, so it's not an issue right now. But at some point, he's going to start putting the puck in the net, isn't he?
That's the way I see it as well. I'm not particularly concerned about the lack of goal scoring. The assists have been there. One of the things that he led Winnipeg in was zone entries throughout the regular season, and he's been flying through the neutral zone where possible against the Trap, even against Nashville in the last series. And one of the biggest goals of that series was actually a Stastny goal that was off of a Laine pass. So it was a redirect that changed the entire game flow of Game 5 of Game 1. It was the game-winning goal that came off of Ehlers generating the zone time all by himself, flying through all of that Nashville team on his way into the zone. So he is doing things that move the puck to good areas, and good things are happening for that line as a result of that. I mean, obviously, I think as a young guy, he's going to put a lot of pressure on himself to be scoring and competing in that particular way. He does have a chip on his shoulder goal scoring wise, but to know that he's doing all of those things that move the puck to the most dangerous areas, and that guys like Stastny are scoring at the end result of that, I think that's really all you can ask for from a line.
And then the other thing is Patrick Laine, who I think I've always been so impressed with the sort of the composure that he shows as such a young player and a guy who's now on the biggest stage of his very young career so far. But we saw the frustration, didn't we, a few times in that last round? Maybe a little bit of personal frustration that he wasn't necessarily scoring goals like he's become accustomed to doing. And by the same token, some frustrating losses that the Jets suffered. But how is his game, other than the fact that he has not been scoring at the rate that he normally does? How has he been?
Similar, you made a really good point. Like, are they getting the looks? Are they getting the chances? Laine's shot rate continues to lead the Jets through the playoffs. In terms of the amount of shots he's taking per minute that he's on the ice, it's right in line with his regular season numbers. So it's not a situation where he's not getting his looks or not getting his chances. One thing that I have definitely noticed, and I think that all of the fans have definitely noticed, and all of the media members have definitely noticed, is that he has yet to have the put the puck through, like, tear a hole in the net moment, that type of Patrick Laine goal so far through the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it does make you wonder if there's anything bugging him with respect to his shooting. He simply has not powered a shot and blistered one through a goalie who had no idea it was coming. There have been wrist shots, there have been deflections, there have been goals that just trickled through. And that's one thing that I'm looking for. He's shooting just as often, and if he starts unloading on the power play and you see that patented one-timer, the goals will come. And if he sticks to, if there is anything bugging him in terms of that shot, then maybe there is something to be concerned about.
And we're talking Winnipeg Jets with Murat of The Athletic in Winnipeg. I'm Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. We're with you until game time. Puck drop about an hour away now. Coverage starting in about 45 minutes here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio from Bell MTS Center in Winnipeg between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Winnipeg Jets. You look at the teams that have been knocked out of the playoffs, and the rosters are littered with trade deadline acquisitions who have produced and contributed with the varying degrees of success. And so often the big headliners, maybe this year, guys like Rick Nash, end up being kind of afterthoughts when, speaking of afterthoughts and somebody who is flying under the radar, Paul Stastny. And we know that Kevin Cheveldayoff has been a guy who's been so hesitant to make trades, especially player-for-player trades. But it looks at this point like he may have landed the biggest coup of the trade deadline in getting Paul Stastny. How much of a difference has he made since coming over, and especially in the playoffs?
Well, I think that Stastny's acquisition is kind of what turns an already good Winnipeg Jets team into a matchup nightmare for other teams to deal with. And it was so funny too. All of the previews, all of the trade deadline shows, all of that were focused on players like Derek Brassard and other options that, hey, it could be what Winnipeg was looking for to sort of shore up its forward depth.
Remember Thomas Plekanec? Thomas Plekanec was brought up as a guy like that all over the place. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Definitely. Yeah, no, good point. That was definitely a name that came up, so much so that in my trade deadline preview, when looking at sort of the analytics and the fancy stats behind some of the rumors Plekanec was in the list of guys I discussed, and I was sort of trying to come up with reasons why it could be good or why it might not be good and all those sorts of things. And then Stastny comes out of nowhere and is a better fit than really any of the rumors possibly could have been. The defensively sound game coupled with the ability to score in the offensive zone, all the rest of the guys that we were generally talking about at that time were more one-dimensional than that. And the fact that he's been able to sort of carry Ehlers and Laine, whose maybe their puck recovery isn't at the same level of a veteran player like Stastny's would be, it's worked so well for Winnipeg. And I think that that's what's turning them into a matchup nightmare for other teams.
And the goaltending matchup is one that a lot's being made of. Connor Hellebuyck's a Vezina finalist, and we know how good he was and how good he's been really all year long. Marc-Andre Fleury's had an unbelievable season, other than the fact that he's missed a lot of it with an injury, and then has been even better in the playoffs. What do you think the Jets can do to make life a little bit more difficult for Marc-Andre Fleury than the Kings or the Sharks were able to do?
Well, I think that the answer there just comes from the fact that I think Winnipeg's going to be in Vegas's end more often than those other two teams were. And then they're going to be getting shots from the middle more often than those other two teams did. So there's going to be shot quality and shot quantity, I think, of the like that Fleury has yet to see in this year's playoffs. Still, I mean, what a wonderful story it is for him. Of all of the castaways and quote-unquote retreads that you hear about for that team, here's a guy that they didn't have room for on back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, now going this deep into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And to be in a room with him for the first time as the media stuff is geared up for round 3 here, he's so calm and confident, and you can tell the degree to which the other players sort of look up to him and defer to him in a way. It's really a terrific story. I don't think that he's seen the type of quality shots and offense that he is about to see against Winnipeg. And if they can drive the net and follow up on those second wave opportunities, which the Jets have been known to have success with, I don't think he's going to run a 960 through round 3. But he's still an excellent goalie, obviously, and that's one very high-risk area in this matchup.
And when it comes to the Jets in Vegas, as we mentioned on the way into this, so both teams are making their first ever conference finals appearances in the National Hockey League. In the case of the Jets, in either incarnation of the franchise. And I think a lot of people are sort of trying to play this up on both sides, and I'd be curious for your perspective. Like I picked Winnipeg to win the Stanley Cup at the beginning of the playoffs, but I've heard people saying, nobody thought the Jets and the Golden Knights would be here. Granted, I did not pick the Vegas Golden Knights to make the conference final, nor did I pick them to make the playoffs at the beginning of the season. But is it really that unexpected, or is there the us against the world thing going on when it comes to the Jets and the pundits, so to speak?
That's an interesting one, because I have spent so much time in the attempt to be objectivity sort of world of spreadsheets and analytics. And then when you're in the room and you talk to the guys, and for the last several months, that's been the case for me in Winnipeg, they do genuinely say all of the right things in a tone that makes you kind of believe that that's actually what they preach and not what they're just feeding to you. And in terms of parking the previous game, in terms of not getting too high, too low, in terms of all those little things attitude-wise that can matter. And I can't speak to Vegas's perspective on that because I have not been in contact there as much. But I do believe that those things matter to a certain extent. I don't look at their inexperience as a major problem. I think when you get enough good players, and that's the most important thing at the end of the day, is get good players, play them, trust them. And both teams do that. Both teams do have a genuinely high amount of talented players, and by the fantasy stats, I think still Vegas is a top 10 team in the league, with or without the us against the world mentality that might be part of what's going on in their world. They are genuinely two very good hockey teams.
How do you think that Vegas and the success that they're having makes the NHL and their general managers look bad in a way?
Sincerely, I do. Whether the rules for the expansion draft or the way that they went about it was unique or brilliant or what have you, I think that the further Vegas goes, the more. I mean, right now there's 27 teams that are not here, still surviving the NHL playoffs, and the fact that things have gone well, certainly there might be some fortune and good fortune to that, but given the amount of players that were sheer retreads and sheer, like, people trading, making deals to make room to give some of these guys away. Yeah, I think that anyone in those situations should give themselves a long look in the mirror. And if they like their decision after thinking about it and being that rational, great. But, I do think some mistakes were made.
Oh, and then we've got teams that have been in the league for 2 decades that have never been to a conference final. They're there now for the first time after winning their division. And I guess one thing that I try to reconcile when I'm thinking about this, because I find this topic to be fascinating when it comes to, I think we sort of revere some of these general managers in ways that maybe they don't necessarily deserve to be revered. But, like, I don't think George McPhee had, even after the draft, had any sense that this was even conceivable. You know what I mean? So that's a tough thing for me to reconcile. Like, how, if he didn't even think they were going to be that good, and there is evidence of that, then I don't know. I guess it just shows you how much we don't know and how much they don't know.
That's, to me, a very fair statement to make. Absolutely. I don't think that, any of, if you can find one, I'd love to see it, send it to me. But somebody who looked at what happened or the roster they built and predicted they'd be one of the Final Four teams standing, I don't think any of us did. And I can tell you that I didn't. So as critical as I'm being about, the idea that they can get a Marcia So or get a James Neal or have a goaltender playing as well as Marc-Andre Fleury is, I am critical of those things, but that is a fair point. I don't think any of us predicted it would go nearly this well for them. And that's part of what makes it probably the best story in all of sports that I know of right now.
Thanks for your time, man. A lot of fun getting to know you a little bit here, and I appreciate you making time for us. Have fun in there tonight.
Hey, likewise. Thanks very much.
That's Murat Atesh covering the Jets for The Athletic in Winnipeg. And that would be, if you could be anywhere in an hour's time, 45 minutes time, Bell MTS Center in Winnipeg would probably be pretty close to the top of the list right now, right? I mean, regardless of who you're a fan of, this is, can we say this is like the biggest game in the history of the Winnipeg Jets franchise? Either way, it's a pretty good one, and it's a pretty big one. Coming up next, we've got another guest joining us. His name is Brian McNally. What a start for the Washington Capitals. I can't believe they're doing this without Nicholas Backstrom. Can they keep doing it without Nicholas Backstrom? What's going on with the Caps? We'll talk Caps with Brian McNally next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. What a crazy game, and what a swing we saw at the end of the first period of it. With more on the story, Lars Eller leading the way in ice time among forwards. What a world. Let's talk Capitals. Brian McNally covering the team for the Sports Capital. Back on the show with us now. Hello, Brian. How you doing?
Connor, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for making time for us here. You can also read Brian's work at NHL.com. How about, let's just start with the turning point, as we would say here, the TSN turning point of the game there, that too many men on the ice penalty that negated that what appeared to be a beautiful goal by Nikita Kucherov, and then the Caps coming right back after. One thing at a time, but just to begin with, just a crazy, crazy swing in the game, wasn't it?
It was. I don't think I've ever seen a swing that quick. I mean, it was literally, you thought Tampa had tied the game. It took a while. Even the Caps players on the bench, Jay Beagle said to us yesterday and again today that the bench didn't really realize Tampa had 6 guys. It's not like they were, you see it sometimes where the entire bench yells and gets the officials' attention. It didn't happen that way. It was the refs that kind of caught it, obviously. And then to have the kind of face-off win, the Caps get a power play out of it, just a couple seconds left in the period, and Alex Ovechkin turns it into a one-timer to beat Vasilevsky and essentially give him a 2-0 lead instead of a 1-1 game. Braden Holtby said afterwards they would have been comfortable if it had been 1-1. They would have been comfortable if it had been 1-0. But, I mean, come on, that's a huge swing of emotion there for both teams. And as TJ Oshie pointed out, Tampa then had to go in the locker room and sit on that for 18 minutes. That's not fun. And so obviously set the tone for what was to come, and really a great game all the way around by the Caps.
And that's the thing, is those goals at the tail end of periods. You always hear about, the goal at the beginning of periods, and yeah, that's big. But for me, the goal at the end of a period, especially in either case, had the goal counted for Tampa, that's a 1-1 game, and then all of a sudden you've got the Capitals with 18 minutes, like TJ Oshie said, to think about the fact that they almost got out of the period with a 1-0 lead. And by the same token, it goes the other way. The Lightning are not only are they thinking about what was or what could have been with the goal that was disallowed, but you've got 7 seconds on the clock, Brian. All you've got to do is don't let Alex Ovechkin get a one-timer off, especially from the slot. Like that's the only thing you have to do. Less than 10 seconds. Now, easy for me to say, obviously, but how do you think the Lightning let that happen?
Well, I think in part, it was a Lars Eller screen, right? That he kind of was in a position where I think Alex Killorn from the Lightning knew intuitively, like, I have to get out there and get Ovechkin. I have to go block that shot. And really, with the time left, that's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about Lars Eller or where he is or if he gets behind you or anything like that. The one-timer is what's going to beat you there. And so I think Killorn admitted after the game I think he thought there was a little bit of a pick, to be honest. I think he had a little bit of a bone of contention there with the officials that they didn't call some kind of interference, or maybe he thought maybe he could get that kind of call there. That's almost impossible in that situation. So he needed to get out to Ovechkin, and he admitted he didn't. And when that happens, look, the Caps don't, especially on the power play, don't need much. They don't need much space. They don't need much time. And quick face-off win, pass from Kuznetsov. All of a sudden, it's 2-0 instead of 1-0, and the Caps are living large. To their credit, too, and we should point this out, they then went on to do well in the second. It's not like they sat on that. They came out and dominated the first couple minutes of the second period and built on it. They showed a killer instinct that I think may be lacking here the last couple of years.
History and the Stanley Cup playoffs, we've seen it happen time and time again, is when big players go down and guys are thrust into bigger roles, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In the case of Lars Eller, it did, and I don't know how long this is going to last. I've always liked Eller as a player here in Montreal, and what he did, though, the other night, the 20 minutes and 35 seconds, more than anybody else, a power play goal while taking that Backstrom spot on the top power play unit. I mean, that was a big time performance from Eller, wasn't it?
He's been the story of was the story of today. I mean, we didn't get to talk to a ton of players, but we were at the Caps Hotel for their media availability, and Eller was one of them. And I'm about to actually, as soon as we're done, I'm going to hit send on a story I wrote on him for the Sports Capital for later tonight. And it's been impressive. But really, this has been all year. I mean, Connor, he's had a really good season. I mean, a career high 38 points. I think it was TJ Oshie. It could have been Jay Beagle today. Said, "Look, he lives in the shadows of Kuznetsov and Backstrom. He just does. Like, he's not going to get. He's a third line guy. He knows his role. I think for Lars, there's still, and you would know this even better than me. Like, his time with the Canadiens still rankles him a little bit. He still feels like he was jerked around and never given a chance to kind of establish himself. Fair or not, I don't know. I don't completely know the backstory, but for me, just watching him here, you see the role he has. He's the third line center. He can kill penalties. He can jump up to the top power play like he did yesterday and hold his own. He's a good two-way player. The Caps locked him up to a contract extension in February because of all this. He's only 28. Like, there's a lot to like about where Lars Eller is. And I think, one of the reporters today asked him, it's not common that we see a guy get better in his 9th NHL season. How have you done it? And he credited playing with Backstrom and Kuznetsov, not playing with them, but watching them every day. And he's become a much more, I'm trying to think of the right word, like evasive player. Barry Trotz put it pretty well today, where he said he's got a lot of like illusion in his game now that he just didn't necessarily have when he was with the Canadiens. So it's been a long time coming, and we've kind of watched it all season. But he's really kind of broken out here, and the Caps need him, because without Backstrom, we all wondered if they could hang with the Lightning at all. And we don't know when Nick Backstrom's coming back. He's still day-to-day. So they may need Lars Eller to do this 2, 3, 4 more times if they're going to have a chance to hold on and knock out the Lightning.
You know what? I would agree with sort of his assessment of his time with the Canadiens and the frustration. And I think a lot of fans, people like me in the media, always said, in the right situation, I think this guy would be. He's never going to be an elite player, but he's got elite size. He skates very well. He's very strong, and he's so good along the boards. And every once in a while, he shows you a flash of something special. He's a good NHL player, and we've seen him in the playoffs for Montreal. He had some huge performances for the Canadiens in the playoffs. He always seemed to be at his best in the postseason. So it makes me happy to see him succeeding. And I guess, though, in the Canadiens' defense, what I would say is that one thing the Habs have never had, literally since I was 10 years old, is centers. And so they've got Backstrom and they've got Kuznetsov. The Canadiens had David Desharnais and Tomas Plekanec, and God bless those two guys. They're just not as good as the guys they've got there in Washington. But interesting to hear him say that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and Barry Trotz kind of built on what you just said. He said, you're kind of, and I don't know, I guess the expectations were probably higher in Montreal, given, that they got him early in his career and they kind of envisioned him being more of probably a top 6 center.
Well, and he was traded for Yaroslav Halak right after what Halak did in the playoffs to the Capitals and the Penguins, which made it that much. Yeah. Okay.
So that much more. So, and Trotz pointed that out. He's like, look, he doesn't have to be that guy. He doesn't have the pressure of having to live up. He's got that two-headed monster ahead of him, and he can now just focus on his role, be a two-way guy, be a glue guy that can plug him. Like I said, on special teams, he can kill penalties. He can be on the power play. Just a totally valuable piece to a team that can make a Stanley Cup run. And it was interesting you mentioned his Montreal playoff time. I was thinking, well, 8 points this playoff, that has to be his career high. And then I looked at 2013-14. He had 13 points, 5 goals, 8 assists for the Habs that year, that spring, as they went on a deep run as well. So, certainly a guy who's proven in the spring to be a guy who can raise his game, which you need as many of them as you can get as well.
Jeez, yeah, 13 points in just 17 games, and managed somehow to have 18 penalty minutes as well along the way. Finishing up, and so that's 9 minor penalties, some of which were probably of the fairly frustrating variety, but hey, those things are going to happen. Before I let you go, Backstrom is got to be a huge story. Like, I'm with you here. I know, and it's amazing that they won one on the road without him, but they're going to need Nicholas Backstrom at some point, aren't they?
Yeah, they've run 1-2 on the road without him. They clinched out Pittsburgh without him too, which I also did not think would happen. I can't. The thing is, I'm a little hesitant to say, like, well, they just got to get him back in there, because if it's clearly a hand injury. He blocked a shot in Game 5, I think last Saturday in Washington. And so if it's a hand injury and he kind of tries to come back and is forcing it and isn't really Nick Backstrom, but you're trying to play him 20 minutes a night, like, is that a good situation? It's a tough situation for the Caps to be in. He's really got to be, that's not really an injury where you can be like half speed. If he can't grip the stick, he can't grip the stick. You can't just force him in there. And so we'll see. We'll see if a week off has given him time to heal. I do think that win bought them a day. I think they can sit him out and maybe wait until Game 3 and test it more then, because you've already come to Tampa and done your job. You don't have to get greedy here and force him back into the lineup. But, just listening to Barry Trotz and reading the tea leaves, it didn't seem like he would be back in tomorrow. It's Sunday night when they play Tampa in Game 2. But there's no question. Maybe they can get away with one more, 3, 4, 5. Then I start to think that center depth that Tampa has eventually will take control of the series.
Yeah, and all this talk about Lars Eller, when Lars Eller is playing the kind of hockey that he's playing right now, you win a game, and you can afford to maybe wait until Game 3. I think that's a good point. Before I let you go, John Carlson continues a strong playoff, and he's 28 years old, and he is going to get paid in this offseason. Is there any conceivable way that they can keep him around there in Washington, short of him taking, I guess, what would be sort of a significant hometown discount?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's in the cards that he would take a significant hometown discount, especially because he's going to kind of setting the stage for the next group of big time defensemen that are going to hit free agency the summer after. So I can't see him taking less money. The Caps are going to have to pay up if they want to keep him. The problem there is, let's say the salary cap increases by, I think what reports are $3-4 million, something like that.
Yeah.
Carlson's cap hit is only 4 now,
yeah.
Or close to that. So like you're essentially taking all of your extra cap money and just plowing it into one player. How are you getting better for next year? Like, how are you adding depth? The Caps relied so much on young players this season, the Christian Juices and Madison Bowies of the world, that and had to go out and kind of fix the blue line at the deadline, and playing 7 rookies in the playoffs. Like, there are a lot of holes to fill still, even as well as they've done here. And so to give all that money to John Carlson, you might have to do it, but it might hamper your ability to get better in the summer. And that's kind of a thing that the organization is going to have to juggle. Can you give John Carlson an $8 million contract or a cap hit, 8 years, $64 million? Can you do that? I don't know, but somebody might give him $7.56 or whatever it would take. And you might just have to suck it up and give him the cash and hope to patch the other holes on the roster with what youth you do have.
If only there was some way of taking like $3.5 million of the money that's going to Brooks Orpik's cap hit and just devoting it to John Carlson. That might be helpful, but obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they could buy him out, and that would save a couple of million. It wouldn't be as much as you just said, but it would be, you could buy out Brooks Orpik and maybe Christian Juice is your left side third pair defenseman, and you go with one of the young prospects at Hershey or Bowie or whatever you want to do. But certainly an option. But even then, it's not quite enough to get a huge impact player. You'd be kind of looking at buying out Brooks Orpik to add like a kind of a role playing type, and they could do that too. But it does make for another interesting summer in Washington as you try to keep this group together as long as you can.
Oh, just very quickly before I let you go, because I'm looking at the depth chart. You mentioned that left side, Dmitry Orlov, who I remember once Pierre Maguire saying, and I believe it was to me, that he thought he was going to be the next Sergei Zubov, and I remember being like, okay, and that's never happened. But still, you talk about Eller sort of really hitting his stride at age 28, 29. And I don't watch as much of the Caps as you do, but every time I watch Dmitry Orlov, I find myself being very impressed by what he's doing out there. He's playing really well, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you always kind of expect him to have maybe bigger numbers than he does, and he's still young. I mean, he's still kind of growing into that. You could see him in a couple of years being, putting up a John Carlson season. I absolutely could. Like, he could put up a 50, 55 point season. I think Carlson had 68 this year. like Orlov has those skills. I mean, you see him, you know, the move he made yesterday on the goal, he kind of set everything up by, I think it was Sergachev. He totally deked him and got open and fired a shot on net. And, you know, that he is a really good player. The Caps have quietly here, because no one really thinks of them as a defensive team, but with Orlov and Matt Niskanen and Karlsson and Michael Kempney added at the trade deadline from Chicago, he's been a revelation. He scored 2 last night. Barry Trotz kind of called that goal. Those 4 guys really skate. They all skate well. They all have offensive instincts. And like you said, Orlov is kind of one of those guys you don't think about, but he is maybe the most dangerous offensive player, just in terms of breaking a play down, like making a defenseman whiff and kind of creating things for other guys on the blue line or from the blue line on that team. And especially doing it without much power play time. Like he's a guy to watch here in the next couple of years, because he could make that John Karlsson leap sooner than you think.
Brian McNally, thanks for your time, man. Have fun covering this series, and well, enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Brian McNally from the Sports Capital, also NHL.com, covering the Washington Capitals, up 1-0 in their series that resumes tomorrow night at 8. Really? 8 o'clock on a Sunday night? Come on. Why? What happened to these weekend afternoon games? I love the matinees. I used to hate the matinees, Laura. Now I love the matinees. I wake up at 4 in the morning. Give me all the matinee hockey you can. Feed it to my veins. All right, coming up next, well, rough start for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Dan Rosen of NHL.com has been covering the Lightning throughout the course of their run so far in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So let's get his perspective on what's going on with them, and whether it's a big deal that they dropped Game 1. That's what's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. He's playing a big role right now with Nicholas Backstrom out of the lineup, and the Caps keep winning games without Nicholas Backstrom, which has the Tampa Bay Lightning shaking their heads. So let's talk Lightning and get into that series a little bit further with Dan Rosen of NHL.com. Dan covering the Tampa Bay Lightning throughout the course of the playoffs. Hello, Dan.
How you doing, Connor? How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing, I guess, better than the Lightning are after a little bit of a rough start. Why do you think? What do we chalk up that rough start? Rest versus rust. What do you think?
You know what? I don't buy the rest thing. I really don't. It was 4 days off, 4 full days off. The Caps had 3 full days off. It's not that big of a difference. I just don't think that the Lightning came prepared to play an Eastern Conference final game last night. And, you know, in the same way, they didn't necessarily come prepared to play an Eastern Conference second round game against Boston in game 1. And, you know, that's preparation. That's certainly, you know, you have to look within when that happens, but they were not good in any area of their game. You know, the reason they beat the Bruins 4 in a row is they played fast. They were great on the forecheck. They dominated the neutral zone. They turned pucks. You know, they forced the Bruins into turning the puck over. And last night, you saw none of that. You know, you just didn't. You saw a team, and I thought John Cooper was 100% accurate. You saw one team that played game 1 in the Eastern Conference Final, and you saw one team that was playing like it was game 38 of the regular season. And it's unacceptable. I don't think it has anything to do with the rest. You can't use that as an excuse. You've got to be up and ready to play at this time of year. And they spotted the Capitals a game, and give Washington credit. They came out and they did what they were supposed to do. I thought they did a really good job of negating, you know, that forecheck by flipping pucks out of the zone and getting quality breakouts. But they had a lot of space on that ice yesterday, and that's on the Lightning for giving it to them, I think.
And there's at the end of the period, that was man, that wasn't just too many men on the ice. That was too many men on the ice for like 10 seconds. And the beautiful goal, that was one of the nicest disallowed goals I've ever seen, Dan. But what a crazy momentum swing, wasn't that at the end of the first period?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because you asked the Lightning about it. They're like, well, it's a momentum swing only because we gave up a goal in the last few seconds of the period, not because we had one taken off the board, because they knew on the bench, you know, they had too many men. And I mean, that's one the refs aren't missing. Okay. I mean, it's very clear. It was going on for a long time. As Steven Stamkos said, he goes, we had too many men by a mile, you know, and they did. And it was one of the prettiest no goals I'll ever see. It certainly was a fantastic play, but the big thing to me there is, you know, it's 2 things. Number one, okay, so you get the penalty, you lose the face-off. That you have to do what you can to tie up TJ Oshie there if you're Anthony Cirelli to at least kill a few seconds, right? And all you got to do is kill 6 seconds off the clock, or 6 or 7 seconds off the clock. So you got to tie him up. He doesn't do that. It's one clean, and then Alex Killorn comes out. He knows the puck is going to Alex Ovechkin, and he comes out, and, you know, I mean, far be it from me. I'd probably dive away from an Alex Ovechkin shot, but I'm not paid to block it. His job there is to block that shot, and he kind of made himself small. Like, he attempted to block the shot, but he didn't lay out to block that shot. And with so few ticks left on the clock, you got to eat one there, and he didn't eat one there, and you know the rest. I mean, that's Ovechkin's one-timer, and comes off his stick in such an odd way and such a powerful way, and it looks like he gets deflected, but it doesn't, because the puck is actually fluttering off his stick, going about 100 miles per hour, and it's a goal.
And that you're right about that, Dan, because that's I was saying this off the top of the show. I'm like, listen, you've got, what, 9 seconds was it on the clock, or 7 seconds, whatever, and it's like
7 seconds. Yeah.
7 seconds. What's the scenario in which the Capitals score a goal here? Here it is. They win the draw clean, and they get a one-timer to Alex Ovechkin. So for the love of God, just do whatever you can to make sure that exact thing doesn't happen. And then there we are, 2-0 at the end of the first period of play, and Alex Ovechkin's kissing his glove and pointing at the sky. Meanwhile, that it speaks to problems that they've got on the penalty kill. This isn't necessarily a new thing, but that is a high-powered power play that the Lightning have on their side. But the penalty kill, this could be, and looking at that game, I found myself saying, oh boy, I mean, this could be what this series ends up being about. They've got to be better on the penalty kill, don't they?
They do have to be, or they have to be even with their power play. You know, I mean, one of two things, and the way they're going on their penalty kill right now, it looks like they might have a better shot to be even on the power play than they do to be killing penalties. I mean, they're just not effective enough. There's too much space in the middle of the ice that they're giving up on their PK. If you think back to that Boston series, you know, the Bruins lose that series, but the Lightning win that series. They were clearly the better team in games 2 through 5. But they didn't allow a 5-on-5 goal, and that was the key. They were so good 5-on-5. The Bruins were still, you know, dangerous on the power play, and it wasn't a big factor because Tampa Bay scored a power play goal in every game, and they were good 5-on-5. If you're not going to be able to match Washington's power play, and we know that's a hard thing to do, you got to be better on the PK. I've seen it from the Lightning in these playoffs. You know, the ability to kill 5-on-3s because they're getting in lanes, they're blocking shots, they're diving. Ryan Callahan is clearing pucks and doing things like that. But yesterday, you know, the one is a bang play, and then the other one, it just looked like way too much room in the slot area. And Ovechkin, that's a goal because Ovechkin whiffs on a shot. I mean, how many times does that happen for the Capitals? You know, when Eller scores off a rebound because Ovechkin misses the one-timer that was wide open for him. So you've got to take that away. It's hard to do, but you've got to find a way, and you've got to find a way to be tighter when you do it. They have to be better on the PK. It's been a problem all year. They've survived. They were 28th in the league on the PK this season, and they're still one of the best teams in the league. They're worse, I think, now. They were 76%, I think, in the regular season. They're 71% in the playoffs, and here they are in the Eastern Conference Final. But they absolutely have to be better on the PK if they're going to give themselves a chance, or at the very least, even it up on the power play. And they didn't do that last night either.
Finishing up with Dan Rosen of NHL.com covering the Tampa Bay Lightning as they trail 1-0 in their best-of-7 series in the Eastern Conference Final. Game 2 tomorrow night at 8 o'clock from Amalie Arena in Tampa, 8 o'clock Eastern, I should say. And so, well, one more thing. Is there anything that you think they need to or should change going into Game 2, the Lightning?
No, I don't see lineup changes coming. I don't think that there's a need for that. They're playing this up. They've been in this position before, and they know how to respond, and they should. They got a ton of playoff experience, and they did do that against Boston. The difference to me is that they were effective against the Bruins in Game 1 and just had bad zone coverage and lost 6-2. They weren't effective in any area, so they got a little bit of a steeper hill to climb because of that. Even though the score wasn't as bad in Game 1 against Washington, 4-2 versus Game 1 against Boston, 6-2, they weren't effective in any area. But I wouldn't change things because this team has had the ability to bounce back. We've seen it in the playoffs. We saw it even in the regular season.
Break soon.
They kind of hit coast mode, but when the Bruins were nipping at their heels or even coming ahead of them, they bounced back and they answered in the final couple weeks of the season. So as bad as they were in Game 1, I fully expect them to be much, much better in Game 2. The lineup, the way it's set up, it works in their favor if they're aggressive, if they ratchet up that intensity, and if they stay disciplined. And they can do all those things with the lines that they have. I don't see any reason to make any changes yet.
Just make sure you've only got a maximum of 5 guys on the ice at all times, and that'll be a step in the right direction.
Well, hey, as John Cooper said, you know, if you want to score a 6-on-5 goal, you know, leave him out there for a while. You'll get an opportunity.
He's the best, eh? He's fun to cover, isn't he?
He's very fun to cover. He makes it light, but there's a serious tone to him and very honest. You know, I think, you know, he doesn't, especially after a loss, like he doesn't pull any punches after a loss. He will tell it like it is, and I do appreciate that. And after a win, you know, I mean, he will praise the guys that deserve to be praised. It's certainly he's a fun. He gets it. He's a good guy to cover.
Dan, you're a good guy for coming on with us. I appreciate it. Enjoy a night with an off night in the series, but I'm sure you'll be watching. We've got a pretty good one coming up in Winnipeg in a few minutes. Cheers. Enjoy it. Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Dan Rosen, NHL.com. I'm Conor McKenna, Hockey Primetime. Let's come back and wrap things up. Did you guys hear there's a new general manager in Toronto? Did you catch wind of that? I'll give you some reaction. I'll give you my thoughts on the Leafs' new general manager. Is it a good move or is it a terrible move? I'll tell you what I think next on Hockey Primetime. Time. And, geez. Seems to be some mixed reaction here, right? The old school guys do not like this one bit. Kyle Dubas is only 32 years old. He spent, 3 years as general manager of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds before he was brought in by the Toronto Maple Leafs a couple of years ago. And he has done a good job, clearly good enough job that Brendan Shanahan chose him to be his general manager. Lou Lamoriello steps aside, the old school guy, the sort of caretaker general manager, and now Dubas takes the reins. I love this move. He's a smart guy, and he deserves this opportunity, and I think he's going to make the most of it. Interesting offseason coming up, and I think he's the guy to get the job done. He's got Brendan Shanahan there. He's got Mark Hunter there, at least for now. And if Brendan Shanahan trusts him, if I'm a Leafs fan, I trust him too. Because Brendan Shanahan's done a hell of a job with that team. I don't see why we should doubt him now. So that's it. Congrats to Kyle Dubas. And I think that Leafs fans are in for another great couple of seasons, maybe a good decade or so. That's all the time we have. Thank you, producer Laura Saba. Thank you to our technical producer, Jesse Ralph. Thank you to our executive producer, Sam Wu. And thank you for listening. I'm Conor McKenna. We will talk to you next week. Enjoy the game.